center, at the center of me. Please let me feel inner peace from my center, at the center of me. Please let me feel inner peace from my center, at the center of me. My heart is open, I am aware, in me's a knowing. Love, 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 my heart is open. I am aware, in me's a knowing. Love, 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 love. Please let me feel inner peace from my center, at the center of me. Please let me feel inner peace from my center, at the center of me. Please let me feel peace from my center, the center of me. Please let me feel peace from my center, and the center of me. My heart is open, I am aware, in me's a knowing. Love, 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 my heart is open, I am aware, in me's a knowing. Love, 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 love. Please let me feel inner peace from my center, at the center of me. Please let me feel inner peace from my center, at the center of me. Please let me feel inner peace from my center, at the center of me. Please let me feel inner peace from my center, at the center of me.
Hello, 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 everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I see that we have people from China and France and Abu Dhabi and from Los Angeles and Houston and everywhere. Welcome, 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 welcome to our learning lab that helps us to and invites us to reimagine action as we go through these difficult times in our world. I am Mary Frances Winters. I am President and CEO of the Winters Group Incorporated. I am in Charlotte, North Carolina, the original land of the Catawba Nations, and I am just delighted to be able to share with all of you this afternoon. We had an overwhelming response to this lab, and we are looking forward to engaging in community. For those of you who don't know who we are, I saw when I looked at the list, I saw many new people. I saw many friends that we've had and colleagues that we've had for a long time. So welcome to those who already know who we are, and welcome to those who are just now engaging with the Winters Group for the first time. But we are a global diversity, equity, and inclusion and justice firm. And our team of strategists and consultants who you see on the right, our leaders, they're academics, they're activists, they're practitioners, and we are just everyday people striving towards our vision, which is a world where the inherent humanity of all people is revered, and we own and act on our collective power, wisdom, and knowledge to center equity and justice in all that we do. And our mission is to center those who are most harmed by injustice and oppression, advance thought leadership that supports diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And you're going to hear more about how we think about justice in just a little bit. And we partner with committed organizations to build equitable and just systems inside the workplace and beyond. And I am joined today by the core Winters Group team. You will know who they are because in their backgrounds, you will see our logo again and again and again. The Winters Group team, the core team, is here today to support us, and we'll be helping as we move into breakouts and we just engage on this topic today. So thank you so much for coming. We recognize that these are difficult times, and you've got lots that you're probably could be doing right now, but we're glad that you chose to be with us. So today we are going to look at this idea of reimagining, reimagining action. A lot has happened over the last year, and it's been a difficult year, I'm sure, for all of us. And I do hope that you're well and that your families are well. We're also glad that you could carve out this time for us. Many have said that these are unprecedented times, and we at the Winters Group believe that we have an unprecedented opportunity to reflect, to reset, and to reimagine different. Reflect and reset and reimagine different. So this is the first in a series of sessions that will build on each other. And today we're going to get started, and then we're going to have you all help us to determine what those additional sessions might look like. But today, what we want to do is begin to build community and better understand what our collective work looks like. We want to share our thoughts and our reimaginations. And then we're going to work a little bit on identifying our spheres of influence and what we can each do leaving here today. There's lots to be done, as we know, and sometimes we think, gee, what can I do? I'm only one person. But together, we're going to reimagine what those actions might look like towards equity and inclusion and justice. We have some commitments that we like to share every time that we do a session. And the first one is to center the experiences of those most impacted. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that this is an opportunity for us to think about marginalized groups, historically oppressed groups. This is an opportunity for us to understand and to center those experiences, to listen and to learn. So we ask that we center the experiences of those who are most impacted by injustice. We also ask that as we work together today, that we choose curiosity over judgment. You know, we're people like to judge, and it's just our human nature, right? But we're asking, when you find yourself in that judging place, that you would say, I wonder why I feel so strongly about that, and go there to a place more that would take you to a place of being curious. I wonder. Let me hear more about that. We're also asking that if we can model authenticity and vulnerability. You know, this is hard work. This is complex work. And oftentimes we don't do our learning because we're afraid that we're going to say the wrong thing. We're trying to create a safe space here today where it's okay to not know. It's okay to question. It's okay to wonder as we learn together, because we recognize that we have limitations. We have the limitations of only having our own experiences that we can look to and go to and understand the world. However, we are also asking that we own our impact. So it's okay not to know. It's okay to question. We're going to call you in. We're going to create a safe space for us to do that. And we're also asking that if we err, that we own the impact that we might be having on someone else, and that we learn from it. The best way that we know how to move the needle and how to model justice is by doing these things, by adhering to, as best we can, to the commitments that we've laid out here. So we would ask that you all, and I would just love to see in the chat, so we can begin our conversation together. If you just put in the chat if you are okay with these agreements and you think that they'll work for you so just put a yes or agree. Yeah, there we go. All right. Thank you. Appreciate it. Appreciate you so much. Thank you. Yes. All right. So we're going to keep, we're going to stay in the chat. And I'm going to ask you, we're going to start to build some community now, begin to get to know each other a little better. So I'm going to ask you to just share, how you're entering today. If you just had one word that would exemplify how you're entering this space today, and then what is your reason for joining our Re-Imagine Action Lab? So I'll start, and I'd like to say that I am joining today grateful. I am grateful for your participation. I am grateful for this opportunity. And so that's how I'm joining. And of course, my reason for joining this lab is so that we can create this community. So thank you. Curious and a learner and interested, ready to learn and motivated, curious and motivated, joining to learn more and be engaged in these topics, frustrated but hopeful, entering with curiosity, tired, to move past the standard actions and approaches. All right. Yes, that's what we want to be about. Connecting with me after many years. All right, curious to move beyond. My first time joining to hear how to grow. Yeah, curiosity to find out ways to act. Yeah, so great. Seeking. Thank you from Minnesota. Open to grow. Growing your practice as an educator. All right. Wonderful. Yeah, so, we're all here to learn together. We're all experts in our own experiences. And so coming together as a group in community to share those experiences, I think it's going to be absolutely wonderful. I am going to now ask us to participate in a poll. You can see that you can join this poll on your smart device on your phone by going to pollev.com/TWG3, or you can text TWG3 to 22333. And then once you've joined, you can share your response. Are you a full-time practitioner in this work? Do you do this work part-time? Or is it not a part of your formal role? All right, I can see our poll is working. That's great. Somebody has already responded, or maybe more than one. To join the poll, it's at the top of the slide. It says respond at pollev.com/TWG3 or text TWG3 to 22333. And once you join, then and then obviously give your answer. And I see Marisha from my team has put in the chat how you can access the poll, but I see that people are finding their way. I appreciate that. Appreciate your answers. With such a large group, it can be a little bit challenging to build community and to engage. But we will use the chat. We will be using the breakout feature of Zoom, and we will find our way. All right, so just a little over half of you indicate that you are a full-time practitioner and half of you are not. That's interesting. What I noticed when I looked at the list of registrants is that you're coming from all different places. We have academics, and we have people from the corporate world. We have people from the not-for-profit world. We have people who are consultants in this space. And so this is an eclectic group of people who have joined today. And that is absolutely, absolutely wonderful. I do notice that when we are in the poll, you're not seeing the closed captioning. All right, well, very good. Thank you for that. So now we know who we have in this Zoom room today. And it's wonderful to have all of you here. Thank you so much for joining. Oh, I see, it continues. So if we continue to do what we have always done, you will continue to get what we've always gotten. Let me just read what it says. If you continue to do what you have always done, you will continue to get what we've always gotten. So I've been doing this work now for 37 years, and I have seen a number of iterations, a number of approaches to this work. And I will say that we have not made progress. We have not made the progress that we need to make. Many of the things that were issues 37 years ago are issues today. In my book, Black Fatigue, How Racism Erodes the Mind, Body, and Spirit, in chapter 3, I call chapter 3, Then is Now, to recognize that we have not made the progress. Then is Now shows just a number of statistics and indicators that of progress, of racial progress, that we have just not made. And so, and what we're finding in this last year, as there has been a reawakening and more of an interest in this work, particularly from a racial lens, is that we're finding already that people are kind of, backing away and saying, well, I'm not really sure that we wanted to go this far. And we're finding that the solutions that people are coming up with are the solutions that we had 37 years ago. Those solutions didn't work then, and they're not going to work now. That's what Mary Frances says. So that's why we wanted to reimagine. We want to reimagine. So this idea of the reimagine action actually was a discussion that I had with my leadership team, Marisha Reese and Brittany J. Harris, who's Vice President of Learning and Innovation. And Brittany is not with us, could not be with us today. But when I brought this up, Brittany said, we really do need to reimagine something different. And so that's why I'm embarking on this idea of reflecting and resetting and actually acting in ways that are different. And when you want radical change, when you want systemic change, what you're going to find is some resistance. And so we're going to talk about that today because we want this to be a movement and not just a moment. When people became interested in looking at this work differently because of what happened last May, when George Floyd was murdered and everything that ensued, the protests that ensued, and so many organizations declared that we're now going to be an anti-racist organization. So we've got to do things differently. So how have we done things, in the past? So the evolution of this work has actually been, when I first started it, I've been doing this in my own company for 37 years, but I started even before then in the corporate world. It was very compliance driven. After the Civil Rights Act of 1964, organizations wanted to make sure that they were complying with the law. Of course, we still have to make sure that we're complying, but that was the primary focus. And then we moved to more of a programmatic focus, a focus on let's start employee resource groups, let's have mentoring programs, let's focus on, on hiring and, representation. And then we moved to what I call the more capitalistic or the human capital focus being, if we hire more women, the studies say that more women in leadership, the studies say that our bottom line will be better. If we hire more people of color, they can help us to market to other people of color. And so it was, how can we use this human capital for us to be more successful in our, in our endeavors? It makes us look better. We'll have a better brand reputation if we do this. And so today, what we're seeing is this idea of the active disruptor. Now, this slide that I'm showing you today, we actually developed this a couple of years ago. So even before George Floyd and everything that happened after that, we had developed this idea that we have active disruptors, and we have people who are saying no more. I wrote the book Black Fatigue from talking with millennials and Gen Zs who are saying we're exhausted, we're tired. And, I was saying, you're only 30 years old, how are you tired? And they look at me like, we know that we're tired. And what we're finding is that in organizations today, millennials and the younger millennials and Gen Zs are saying, we're not going to take it. We're seeing employees who walked out of Google, walked out of Wayfair, who are saying, we're not going to just sit back and be compliant or complicit with injustices. And so, it's really important for us to figure out, how do we reimagine action? This is a new day. We're seeing a total transformation of our work, of the DEI work. And we're adding DEIJ. In my book, Black Fatigue, I talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. A justice-centered approach is very different from the approaches that we have taken in the past. And again, many organizations are trying to use the same approaches. They're focusing on representation. Well, we just need to hire more people. Well, we know when we just hire more people who don't look like us, and the organizational climate is not welcoming, is not just, that people will leave that organization. I just gave a keynote yesterday where I said it was a 518% increase in the number of Black women who started their own businesses from 1997 to 2016, leaving the corporate world because of injustices. And so we have to do something different. And so now I'd like to ask in chat if you would share, where do you think your organization is in that evolution? And what is the primary focus of your diversity, equity, and inclusion, and justice efforts? If you could share in the chat where you think you are. Are you compliance driven? Are you more programmatic? Are you human capital focused, where it's the business case? Or are you at the active disruptor stage? Human capital focus. I see somebody has the Jedi office. Yes, we thought about that too. Human capital, okay. So it's more more of a capitalistic business case. How can we make more money in our organization? Or it may not even be make more money. It might be, how do we achieve our mission? If you're a not-for-profit, how do we achieve our mission by having more people? Planning to go beyond training, I see. Human capital focused. Your role is brand new. Well, your last employer was between compliance and human capital. Okay. Human capital and health equity. All right, so it looks like a lot of you are saying you're a struggling disruptor. All right, yes. See, that's the new place, right? Okay, human capital, but moving towards the active disruptor. Okay, trending towards it. Conflict aversion, yeah. Yes, we know about conflict aversion, and we will be talking about that a little bit today, but more in some of the other sessions. Most are at the human capital, yep. Mm-hmm. Your efforts are as an active disruptor. Thank you, Tina. Compliance only where it's obvious. Oh my. Okay. Meeting leaders where they are, so a bit of the last three. Okay. All right. So it doesn't surprise me that some of you are saying that you're tending towards being disruptors, or you're already there, because you're here. You're here in this session, and you probably wouldn't be here in this session if these kinds of concepts of reimagined action and resetting and rethinking and reflecting on what's next and how do we actually center justice. You probably wouldn't be here if that wasn't where you if that wasn't where your thinking was. You'd like to hear a bit more about the 4 types? Yeah, so thanks, Dee. I'm not going to go into that today, but we can, we can surely talk, at another time about what's characteristic. But, basically the compliance is, what's the law say? I'm just going to comply with what the law is making me do. Programmatic is, let's set up some programs for historically marginalized people. So let's have some employee resource groups. So we have programs. Let's have history days. Let's have, let's recognize, Black History Month and Women's History Month. So that would be the programmatic focus. The human capital focus is really about how can we take advantage of this and leverage this for our main mission, which is the bottom line. And the disruptor being more from a justice perspective. And we're going to go there right now. And I am going to ask you to share. You should be already logged in. So I'm going to ask you to share what comes to mind when you hear justice. When you hear the term justice, how do you define it? And you can use one word or just a few words, because it's going to, we're okay. Fairness. Equality, equitable. Freedom and liberation. What's right? Rectifying, all right. Oh, this is one of the word clouds, so when the words get separated, I think. Fixing, flourishing. Fair treatment. Reconciliation, all right. I saw the word harmful, but I think it probably went with some other words that meant probably fixing what was harmful. Being accountable. Oh, yeah. Fantasy? Our fantasy. Righting the wrongs. Harmony. Saw somebody said golden. I don't know if that went with another word. If whoever said golden could put in, oh, maybe the golden rule. Yeah. So we like to think about this as the platinum rule. Golden rule, treat other people the way they want, treat other people the way you want to be treated. The platinum rule, treat people the way they want to be treated. Yes, yes, yes. All right. Okay. I am going to now turn over the facilitation to Thamara Subramanian. Thamara is the Equity, Audit, and Strategy Manager at the Winters Group. She will tell you a little bit more. I'm going to ask her to tell you just a little bit more about her background, and then we will dig a little bit more into this idea of justice.
Cool. Thank you so much, Mary Frances. And hi, everyone. Good afternoon or morning or night or whatever it is for you, since we're all around the world. As Mary Frances said, my name is Thamra Subramanian, and my role with the Winters Group is conducting the cultural audit and equity audit process, where we look at qualitative and quantitative forms of data to find insights of what you can change, what are areas of opportunities, and how you can better operationalize and or center justice as described by this definition here at your organization. My background's in public health, so I view public health and diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice as hand in hand. So having equitable and just workplaces is an example of promoting public health. So as you can see here at the Winters Group, we've been talking a lot about how we can embed justice into our definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we've really found out, and as Mary Frances said, a lot of organizations we're working with, currently work with, and have worked with in the past have come out and made these big grandiose statements of we're going to be anti-racist, we're going to be racially just. Yet, as Mary Frances had mentioned before, people are continuing to do the same thing, and it creates the same results. We're finding that a lot of organizations tend to keep wanting to focus on, but what is the business case? Or as a lot of you are saying, how can we get our leaders on board? We have naysayers, there's resistance, and what can we do about that? So we are here kind of today with you all to share with you what justice means, and here, orientation and consciousness. And what we want to ask when we think about justice and operationalizing justice is, who is benefiting from our actions, our initiatives, our programs, our policies? Who is being harmed? And how can we reduce or mitigate that harm over time? And then lastly, and this could be the most difficult of all of these questions that you can think of, is how can we redistribute power? Oftentimes, and even in our education that we do at the Winters Group, we talk about power being the silent P in diversity, equity, inclusion. Nowadays, we're recognizing that power needs to be out there. We have to acknowledge and recognize the systems of hierarchy, your organizational structures, who has power and why based off of their cultural identities, and how we can shift and redistribute this power in a way that we can create more equity in our systems and at our organizations. So if you go to the next slide, we can see a lot of you have probably seen a graphic similar to this, comparing equity to equality. So as you see on the left, so our wonderful colleague, Crystal Nicholas, created this graphic as a little bit of a shift from the original equity versus equality graphic. So you can see here that on the left, you have the equality. So everyone has that same box, and still not everyone can see the game. And then you have equity. Everyone's given the resources, or as if you already may be familiar with the definition of equity, getting resources to achieve equal opportunity. But on the right, you can see what we're talking about here. So what we're seeing as justice. Justice is about correcting and repairing, responding, and addressing harm. So you can see here, we took out the fence completely, level the playing field, and remove the barrier. So how can we operationalize that? On the next slide, you can see here, we have some examples of how repairing harm and acknowledging harm can look like at organizations. So a variety of these organizations here have done various things to various extent that are examples of things that are innovative in addressing those questions. How can we redistribute power? Who's being harmed, and how can we mitigate that? And who's benefiting, and how can we achieve kind of a communal benefit? So on the left here, top left, you have the American Gynecological and Obstetrical Society. So something they did in partnership with the AMA recently is remove a statue of Dr. James Marion Sims, who was notoriously known since the middle 1800s to perform experiments with no anesthesia on enslaved women in Alabama. And also did a lot of very painful and non-consensual surgeries on these women. He eventually served as the president of the AMA, and he has a statue of him in Central Park that says, "His brilliant achievements carry the fame of American surgery throughout the entire world." So in 2018, this statue was removed. So this might not seem like a huge thing to a lot of people, but this is a really great example of disrupting the structural racism, those pictures of people who have created harm, names, buildings with names that are named after people who have created harm for communities of color. Another example is Aetna, which is one of the largest health insurers in the country. They addressed an apology for reimbursing slave owners since the 1850s for financial losses that they have received when their enslaved folks died. So they addressed an apology in 2002. So this happened even before everything that has happened with racial injustice in this past year. Dr. Seuss, Disney, all of these bigger entertainment companies for kids recently announced that racist depictions would be removed from circulation, racist depictions of in classic films and movies would be removed. And then they also began attaching warnings, another way of mitigating harm, showing that, you know, hey, we recognize that this is part of our history. We can't change it because it was in the past, but we can acknowledge it, learn from it, and take ownership that we are part of this system. And lastly, we can see some of the more recent ones, such as the Jesuit Order of Catholic Priests. They vowed to raise $100 million to benefit. So this is a great example of reparations, financial, centering, operationalizing justice. Removing Donald Trump from Twitter. That's another great example of making sure that Twitter acknowledged their complicity in perpetuating harmful rhetoric that was coming from this person. So these are some examples of different ways that justice has been centered. Of course, this is not exhaustive, and also this is not the only solution. This suddenly removing a statue doesn't mean that the problem is solved. Removing someone off a social media platform doesn't solve these systemic issues, but it is a step towards achieving justice and redistributing power, as we were talking about earlier. So if we go to the next slide, what we're going to acknowledge today is starting to begin this conversation. So we know that this is the start of a few different sessions on Reimagine Action. So we wanted to introduce that for justice, you are required to know the language and the history. Oftentimes, we've been at the Winters Group trying to be kind of ahead of the curve and introducing a lot of concepts such as white supremacy, centering white comfort, a lot of these things in our work, and oftentimes we get resistance for it. So we want to acknowledge that we need to know this language and start talking about this white normative culture in our work. And what does this mean? And how can we make sure to decenter white comfort when we're thinking about these terms, when we're thinking about disruption, and when we are centering justice? So white normative culture are dominant standards of behavior embodied by our institutions. So we'll talk a little bit more of some examples of this, but they operate subtly to the point where we don't even question them. But they often determine what we think is normal, what we think is professional, what we think is a good leader or a good employee at our organization, what we think is healthy. There are so many ways that this white normative culture serves as a kind of undertone, and is often the reason why we see resistance, because we have these cultural values that are prioritized over other cultural values at our organization. So what do I mean by that? So if we go to the next slide, we often talk about all of these words: colonization, decolonizing. We even did a series with the Winters Group on decolonizing diversity, equity, inclusion. Patterns of white supremacy, systems of oppression, trauma, stress, fatigue. These are all things we've heard, but we never really put them together. So when we're thinking about how we created a white normative culture, we have to inevitably address colonization. So When we're talking about colonization here, we're talking about the European colonization of America. We also do recognize that white Europeans have colonized other countries as well, which adds another layer to the immigrant diaspora of a lot of people in our country. So colonization gave us the physical takeover of our land and bodies. So for example, we've created a health insurance system. We've created educational institutions and curriculums guided by white teachers on what is considered worthy to know and what is not considered worthy to know. What is our history and how history is seen was written and by white educators in the past. Our healthcare insurance system reimburses based off of what our health insurance system thinks is health and not health, what they think is medicine and not medicine. Those are just some few examples of how colonization has created a system and a physical takeover. With colonization, we've brought these patterns of white supremacy. We'll talk a little bit more about this later in our sessions, but some of these patterns include, for example, prioritizing quantity over quality, saying go big or go home. These are all common things that we were taught are part of not only American culture, but also a value that centers kind of Eurocentric ideals of what is considered right. Individualism, for example, is one of the things that the United States prides themselves upon. But this is actually a value that was brought in from colonization. So the thing with these values is some of these values perpetuate creating a dynamic where other cultures aren't as valued as much. So that's what we want to see. How are we maybe centering Eurocentric values in the way that we think about these things, in the way that we create practices, policies, even in the ways that we define diversity, equity, and inclusion? A lot of you talked about this human capital focus for your diversity, equity, inclusion work currently. A lot of that centers white comfort, centers these systems that colonization has brought. And that's what the next little bucket here is: systems of oppression, capitalism, our healthcare institutions, our educational institutions. These are all upholding these patterns of white supremacy culture. And lastly, what is the effect of all of these? This is the impact, especially trauma, stress, fatigue, all of these things generationally that have been passed down, perpetuating a lot of harm, especially to folks who don't fit into this white normative culture. So Black, Indigenous, people of color, LGBTQ folks who didn't historically fit into white normative culture or what those values mean. So this is just kind of setting the stage for a little bit more of what we want to talk about as we think about, is your organization ready for justice-centered approach? Is your organization ready to think about things like reparation, repair, or harm? So on the next slide, we have another poll asking this question. And yes, this is the baseball guy knocking that system away, because truly disrupting this root of value is what the justice-centered approach is looking for. So same kind of directions here. To what extent do you think your organization is ready for a justice-centered approach? So we're seeing a lot of variety. But the majority of you are saying not even close. And you know what? That is okay. And that's why we're here today, kind of to give us the tools, the skills, the things that we need to start working on it, to start getting there. Awesome. And if you all have any context or want to share ways that, you know, the folks that are doing it or are working there, what you are doing to just share with the greater community out here, that would be great.
Thank you, Thamara.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate, thank you for great job, great job. So if we're looking at this slide, we're seeing that almost half of you are saying, you know, not even close. And so that's the reimagine action work that we want to do. And Thamara, I heard you say, well, that's okay that you're not close. I'm going to disagree with you. It's not okay. It's not okay. It's not okay that almost half of us are saying that we're not even close to a justice-centered approach to this work. That's what we really need to swiftly move towards. We talk about this being a journey. We talk about this taking time. And so I'm going back to what James Baldwin said back in 1968, I believe it was, how much time? My grandfather's time, it didn't happen. My great-grandfather's time, my father's time, my sister's time, whose time, right? And so I think that we have to, if in fact we are serious this time, we need to absolutely, we need to absolutely move to this justice-centered approach and deal with the discomfort that so many people continue to have. What we're finding with our clients who've said we want to take a justice-centered approach, who've said we want to do anti-racism work, what they are not understanding is that anti-racism work is not diversity work. It's not your traditional diversity work. It's not your traditional inclusion work. It's not your traditional cross-cultural competence work. Anti-racism work has a particular body of scholarship around it that requires us to use language that make people, shiver and they become, discombobulated when they hear, words. You saw on our slides, we talked about white normative culture. Well, I picked up that slide from a client who asked us to not say white supremacy culture because they thought that white normative culture, would fit better. And so this is our challenge, folks. Our challenge is that we have to move towards what I call collective accountability. Because again, we hear so much about, it's not my fault. I didn't do it. I'm not responsible for what happened, 400 years ago. But we are all accountable for correcting those systems if, in fact, we believe in and liberty and justice for all. And so, back when we had our previous president who put out these executive orders that said, you can't do this work. When I looked at the executive orders, I said, yes, we absolutely can do this work. There's nothing in here that says that we can't do this work if, in fact, we are going back to our values of and liberty and justice for all. So in your organizations, when you get pushback, you need to go to those values. You need to say, here is what we said we are. And for these groups, we are not that. We are not living up to those values. And so the work is daunting. The work is exhausting. The work is fatiguing. However, when we take a collective accountability approach, and we, I see words in the chat about, I need to convince people. People are, people who have a scarcity mentality or the zero-sum game, and I'm going to lose if you win. That truly is a mindset that is very entrenched, particularly in Western culture, in this individualistic kind of culture that we have. So the work is daunting, and it's not going to be pleasant to break it down. So we have to, when I say that, what I mean by that is that there is going to be conflict. Any major social change has required conflict and collective accountability to move to where we want to be, where, equity happens when we can no longer predict outcomes by one's identity, when we can no longer predict outcomes by one's identity. And we need some critical organizational shifts if we are going to move in that direction. One, our language, just what I was saying. We have to shift away from sanitized, polite, positive language that people like to hear and learn the language of justice, to name it. Many organizations, you can't even say racism, because if you say racism, then that might mean that you might get a lawsuit, going back to that compliance, mindset again. We are in transition with our language, adding J to DEIJ, or J at the front, Jedi, justice, makes it, front and center. That justice work is very different than D work, than E work, than I work. It's more aligned with E work. We have clients who won't even put E into their acronym because they say they're not ready for equity. We need to shift away from shock and distancing to acknowledging our mistakes and our complicity. We need to admit that, acknowledge that part of justice is acknowledging the wrong. We need to shift away from responding only with these messages of solidarity to very specific action steps that go beyond the programmatic kinds of actions, that get to the systemic issues that are deeply rooted in our in organizations. We're doing that with some of the audit work that we do, that Thamra talked about. And oftentimes, well, not often, but sometimes, I don't want to say often, but sometimes we're told we don't want to read it. We don't want to see the report because if we do, there could be a legal liability. Or, we don't want to even do an audit because we're afraid of what we might find. We're hearing those kinds of things as well. The timeline, I've already mentioned that. We're not ready for this. We have to be ready for this, folks. Centering equity, moving away from assuming that leaders can address the problems alone to some equity-centered types of design. Whose input is sought? Who is at the table? We've been called into organizations where they put out these wonderful statements last June saying that they were going to be anti-racist organizations. And when we ask, well, who was involved in putting this plan together? They say, well, the leadership team. Who comprises the leadership team? Middle-aged heterosexual white men. And so, that's why you're getting this kind of feedback on what you put out. And so we have to center equity in what we do. And then the scope, oftentimes when we think about justice, we think about it from an external perspective, social, corporate social philanthropy and those kinds of things. We have to look inside to see what kind of justice, can happen inside as well. So we have been talking quite long enough, and we are now going to allow you to go into some breakout rooms, and we're going to send the Winters Group team will be in and out of those breakout rooms to help you. We're not going to get into your content. We are not going to be, you're going to be the experts in your room, but we want to make sure that that you have what you need. But we're going to put together probably 12 or 13 rooms. I'm not exactly sure because we want to have only 7 or 8 people in the rooms. We're going to ask you, what are you noticing related to this work in your sphere? What do you see? What organizational shifts do you see, or where do you see those organizational shifts towards justice? And where are you seeing resistance in your world, in your sphere? In the breakout rooms, we are asking you to commit, and we're going to be putting these commitments in our chat so that you have them in the room. We're asking you to commit to respond to different perspectives with curiosity. Ask for clarification if needed. Notice and sit with any feelings that come up for you. Practice mindfulness and breathing. And so there may be some feelings that come up for you that are triggering. Right? You may have some trigger, but we're asking you to feel them. We're asking you to be with them, and we're asking you to practice mindfulness, because we don't have a lot of time together, perhaps, to unpack everything. We're asking you to take space and make space. So everyone has an opportunity. Everyone who wants to has an opportunity to. Everyone has an opportunity to participate. We are asking you to maintain confidentiality and speak from your own experiences and use I statements. We are going to give you 15 minutes in your breakout rooms. And yeah, so I don't know if there are any questions about the breakouts before we put you into the breakouts. Put them in the chat. I think we should have the questions that the discussion questions. Yep, they are there, as well as the commitments. Lee Morrison, one of our managers in Learning and Innovation, has put that in the chat. What is the assignment? Okay, the assignment. Sorry that I wasn't clear on that. In your breakout group, we're asking you to discuss what are you noticing related to this work? Where do you see organizational shifts towards justice? And where are you seeing resistance? It is a discussion with your smaller group. Somebody is asking, how do you switch to breakout groups? We're going to be putting you into breakout groups randomly. So in terms of the slide about what we're asking the questions, in the chat, you will find those questions for you to use in the breakout group. I'm glad you like random. a message is going to pop up for you to join the group when it's time, as soon as I'm finished with these instructions.
I know some people are asking about the 6 critical shifts that Mary Frances just presented. When you are in your breakout groups, we will be able to share those 6 critical shifts, either through message or through sharing this slide.
Thank you, Thamara. All right. Are you seeing what are you seeing now?
You're good.
Yes, we see your slide. Looks great.
Okay, great. Okay, so we had, my group had some really wonderful discussion. And so I think we have some time now to share. You can come off mute and just a few of the groups to give a little summary of what you talked about.
Yes, and you can use the raise hand feature, and I will let Mary Frances know who's got a hand raised.
Anybody?
All right, I see a raised hand. Freddie.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Freddie Diaz. I'm in Los Angeles. Not sure if I'm going to be able to summarize what the team discussed, so maybe just things that popped up. We are noticing shifts at work. I think there was, I think it all sounded like we were all striving to do something more, that there has been recent change, etc. I talked about how in our company, we're seeing more action in the past 1.5 years, pushed through that, just people just wanting to have change. Kind of, where do you see organizational shifts towards justice? I heard that there was more like some policy changes. One of our team members mentioned how there's like they want to make sure that things, the policies are made now so that it's better in the future. In my company, we still don't have that. And where are you seeing resistance? We did talk a bit about that. We talked about middle management in the corporate world, also decision makers. And they're just kind of a discussion about how do we kind of overcome this when people that are the decision makers are not embracing this? And so how do you go around them and are kind of leaders in our organizations, the right people to be leading the company if they're not the ones that, if they're not embracing this? We don't have an answer for that, but those were some of the discussion topics.
Yeah, that last piece about are these the leaders who should be leading the organization? I think that one is key. And one of the things that we've been talking about at the Winters Group is helping our clients to look at who are you hiring? Who are you hiring as leaders, and how are you assessing their capability to lead across differences, their capability to understand injustices, their interest in it. And so I think that there has to be, people are assessed all the time for their capabilities and their competencies. And I think this is an area that from a systems perspective that we need to think more about and do more with. So thank you for that. Thank you very much for that.
And Grace also has a hand raised.
Yes, so we were all over the spectrum in our group, some group joining in, a company just starting the, and having, if you will, the luxury to go organic and allow grassroots building up, and others that have had the good fortune of marrying Mary Frances, Sodexo, and so they're pretty more in the edge and ready to take public stands in social justice. Some interesting points, though. You talked about choosing the right leaders. In one of the ladies who were sharing on her school system, you may have the right leader in your section, but then dealing with leaders in others, right? In other groups who don't feel the same way, and it costs money. the decision making will cause whether they get a grant or not, if they want to take a step forward towards this or not. So it takes real courage for those leaders once they're in and need our support, right? To make the tough decision by decision, right? It's a long haul, but yeah. So very interesting, the spectrum.
Yes, thank you for that. I think we're, honing in here, and that's a really good point. It's, the leader, one leader may be, may get it, but other leaders may not. And I think, we've always talked about this work, needing to be sanction driven from the top. And I think it is at the top where those leaders at the top need to hold the other leaders, accountable. So we're working with organizations right now where the CEO is saying, well, my direct reports, they're not, seeming to get this, and we're moving too fast for them. And so you need somebody at the top who's going to actually drive that and make it not okay, not to be on board with this, if in fact that's what you have put out there in the universe. If you have put out publicly that you're going to be an anti-racist organization, that you're going to work towards justice, then all people who are in that leadership suite need to understand that. I was working with somebody, one of the leaders, who said, "Well, I didn't even know we said that. Did we put out a statement?" The person didn't even know it. And so, yes, there's a lot of work to be done there. So thank you very much for that.
And I believe Shobana has a hand raised. Please correct me if I did not pronounce that correctly.
You hit the nail right on the head. And I don't want to try to pretend to speak for my group. We had some awesome contributions, but I will say that in my organization, one thing that I'm hesitant about, and one thing I'm noticing in following other organizations is when we censor the voices of Black, Indigenous, and POC, either folks or organizations or communities.
I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you. Can you speak up just a little bit?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you hear me better now?
A little bit, yes.
Okay. Just trying to be really, I just want to highlight the intentionality that I'm trying to maintain with my organization in not tokenizing any one individual, and not putting too much, not putting responsibility to educate on our Black, Indigenous, and POC counterparts. I think that it's important to be really intentional in walking the line as an organization. If we have predominantly white folks at the head of the table, and we're inviting other folks into our spaces, how are we doing that in a really respectful and responsible manner, without putting all of the onus on historically marginalized populations to educate us? And also, how are we stopping ourselves from dictating how the company should go, and listening and centering the voices of those historically and colonially marginalized communities? So trying to find that balance there.
Right. Thank you so much for that. We, in our work, we do talk with particularly dominant group people about not putting that burden on BIPOC, and allowing BIPOC to set boundaries, and teaching and encouraging BIPOC to set boundaries in terms of what they will not do. Make it should be an invitation and not an expectation. When we put people, I talk about this in Black Fatigue as well, who gets on the diversity committee and who's the first people asked to do that. And they're also responsible for, continuing to do the work, whatever role they have in the organization, and not being compensated, not being recognized for the extra work of being that spokesperson for the group. So yes, so that's very, very important. So this has been a great conversation. We're going to have to move on, unfortunately. And when Brittany and I talked about this, she said that she wanted to do these for 2 hours, and I said, well, I don't know if people will give us 2 hours, but I'm seeing now that we probably do need to have the 2 hours. So we will look at that the next time. So so acting in our spheres of influence, right? What can we do? everyone has a sphere of influence. There's a place where you have some control. You may not have full control. You may have limited control. And there are places where you probably don't have any control, but there's a place where you have some control, even if you don't have formal authority. So we want you to think about, using your power and what that might look like in your community, disrupting colorblind ideologies, as an example, in your personal circles, with your family, how you spend your money, where you spend your money, using, we've seen over this last year a lot more attention being given to Black owned and owned businesses and businesses owned by BIPOC. We're seeing more, just amplifying that. And that's a wonderful thing. If you're a leader on your team, in your interactions, listening and honoring the experiences, even when they don't align with your own, not rejecting or minimizing. We've seen so much of that over the years that, just sort of, that doesn't really happen. You're being too sensitive. Oh, are you going to play the race card? All of those kinds of things that we hear. So, really listen to those experiences. And then in your own learning journey, continuing beyond this experience or other experiences that you have, make it something that you put in your way of being, way of doing, way of experiencing the world. You will learn about others. It's really important in terms of doing our own work. So some of the key things that hopefully we took away from today is that reimagining requires collective accountability. The actions for justice are different from the actions for diversity or inclusion. Justice requires correcting systems. And as we move forward with these sessions, we're going to go deeper. This was an introductory session. We didn't go really deep today. We wanted to kind of whet your appetite for this because we know people are all at different places along the learning continuum. So for some of you, you may have said, oh, I knew all of this, what they said today. But again, we wanted the opportunity to dialogue. And what I learned in my group, I don't know, other groups said that as well, is that, gee, even though we're talking about justice, we're not really doing justice. There is a lot of resistance right now as we try to turn this corner, as we try to reimagine what it looks like. And we want to create this community where we can share about that resistance, where we can feel that we have a place where we can talk about it, where we can be open about what some of those frustrations are. So that's what we're trying to do. And to leave here each time with, what can I do? What can I do? And so, so people are agreeing on the 2 hours. Okay, all right, thank you. So we're going to be back at you in July. We don't have the exact date yet, and then in September and in November for this particular series. So as we check out today, what are you? And you can do this in the chat. What are we taking from this session? What are you taking? What will you do differently moving forward? And I could answer all three or any one of these. And what would be most impactful for us to reimagine in future labs? What do you want to talk about? We're going to be sending you an evaluation where we're going to be asking that same question, but we'd like to get some of that now if we could. What are you taking? What will you do differently? And what would be most impactful for future labs like this? Okay, so you're taking anti-racism is not D&I. Yeah, thank you. Power is the silent P, yeah. Brainstorm, share ideas on impactful practices. Okay, thank you, Ingrid. It's a good dialogue. Would like tools and tips. Yeah, tools and tips, we're gonna bring some of those to you. We think though that the tools and tips without the foundational understanding don't go very far. These things are so deeply rooted. The tools and tips are the leaves and the branches on the tree. We're going to try to get underneath that into the roots. Operationalizing justice dimensions, great. It's a lot to try to manage the work. Yeah, those who are in this work and do this work on a full-time basis, this is another space for us because the work is exhausting. The work is frustrating. Guilt is not an option. To hear about accountability in a not-for-profit with 99% volunteers. Yeah, the root work. Discuss, what sorts of resistance occurs and how to address them. Yep, absolutely. I think that will be a good topic for the future. Reimagining the concept of buy-in. Exploring the steps to operationalize. So we have a series in our inclusion solution blog. So if you go out on the web, and somebody I'm sure from my team will put the link in this in the chat. We've been doing a whole series since January on operationalizing justice. And there are a number of every week we do a different article and a different aspect. We've got Lee wrote one recently on reparations, and Thamara wrote one recently on neutrality is not neutral. And I've written about leadership and what operationalizing justice from a leadership perspective looks like. Scott has written for that series, Scott Ferry, who's one of our instructional designers who's on today as well. So if you go to our inclusion solution blog, you will find many very practical solutions and articles about how to operationalize justice. Accepting the risks we take. Yes, as be a BIPOC or DEI practitioners. Yeah, there are always risks for framing. Exactly. Yes, we've talked about those risks as well. The 6 critical shifts was new information. Great. Thank you. Well, we got more critical shifts too. Those were some of the things, but we can't put them all out there at the same time because we can't process that many. Success moments or stories of white perspectives being transformed. Yeah, I've got a couple of those actually. I won't share them with you today, but I'm coaching some CEOs, and I've got some really powerful stories of some things that have really worked for them. So this is great. This is great. Very, very good. I'm going to leave you with this video. I know some of you may have to drop off, but this is Maya Angelou, and I think it's a good way to send us off. I appreciate so much you being with us today and spending this time. It's been really, really powerful. I've learned a lot. I absolutely have learned a lot. You may have to turn up your volume if it's too low. Mine's all the way up.
Maybe the hardest part is if you teach, you have to live your teaching. You can't say you do not as I do, but do as I say. No. You have to say, I'm doing my best to live what I teach. I have a painting by Phoebe of a group that she calls Sister Suki's Funeral. And all the women, there are about 9 women, and they all look like women in my grandmother's prayer meeting group. So whenever I'm obliged to do something, I take that painting and I look at that painting. There's an empty chair. And I think, now, what would Grandma do? What would she say? I can almost hear her voice say, now, sister, you know what's right. Just do right. You don't really have to ask anybody. The truth is, right may not be expedient. It may not be profitable, but it will satisfy your soul. It brings you the kind of protection that bodyguards can't give you. Try to be all you can be, to be the best human being you can be. Try to be that in your church, in your temple. Try to be that in your classroom. Do it because it is right to do. You see, people will know you, and they will add their prayers to your life. They'll wish you well. I think if your name is mentioned and people say, oh, hell, oh, damn, I think you're doing something wrong. But if your name is mentioned and people say, oh, she's so sweet, he's so nice, oh, I love, oh, God bless her. There you are. So try to live your life in a way that you will not regret years of useless virtue and inertia and timidity. Take up the battle. Take it up. It's yours. This is your life. This is your world. I'll be leaving it long before you under the ordinary set of circumstances. You make your own choices. You can decide life isn't worth living. And that would be the worst thing you can do. How do you know? So far. Try it. See. So pick it up. Pick up the battle and make it a better world. Just where you are. Yes. And it can be better, and it must be better. But it is up to us.
It is up to us to make it a better world. I thank you so very, very much for being with us today. I wish you well, stay healthy, stay safe, and we will let you know when the next lab will be set up. Be well. Peace and blessings.